Remember the Y2K scare? Yeah, I know. I'm probably dating myself just by mentioning it. If you're under a certain age, I doubt it means anything. At most, it's just an obscure bit of news trivia from the late 90s and early 2000s. This misguided but overblown panic that never amounted to anything. It almost seems funny when you look back at it, thinking every computer system in the world would go haywire just because someone forgot to add a few extra digits for future years. But trust me, Y2K was no laughing matter. There was real, serious concern that this was going to cause all sorts of problems. Even if our digital infrastructure wasn't nearly as large as it is today, the potential for danger was there. I understood that danger more than most because I was part of the effort to deal with Y2K. Now, granted, my part was small. I worked for a tech consulting firm at the time. But what I did, it rarely amounted to more than software updates and installing patches. But I was also more tech savvy than most people at the time. I had been your stereotypical computer geek as a kid. Remember, this was back when being a computer geek made you weird. But I eventually learned to refine and market that skill. And the Y2K scare created plenty of demand. I honestly don't think I would have achieved the success I did without it. In some sense, the entire course of my life has been heavily influenced by the Y2K bug. I wish that only extended to establishing my reputation as a good, capable tech support guy. But computers have a way of complicating things in ways you don't expect. It's one of the first things any programmer learns when they start tinkering with computers. Changing a tiny bit of code can have a big impact. And when you're dealing with vital systems that manage our money, our information, and our infrastructure, well, complications can be costly, and not just in terms of repair bills. Back in 1999, we thought we understood the issues surrounding the Y2K bug. I even got to sit in on some national security briefings at the Pentagon during the spring of that same year. I actually learned things about our national infrastructure at the time that would probably not sit well with the average non-tech savvy person. But thankfully, the right people seemed to be confronting this issue, and they had a viable plan. Me personally, I was more than happy to go along with that plan, mostly because I was able to build plenty of overtime over the course of that year. It helped make extra money while also padding my resume. I could boast that I helped update some of the most sensitive computer systems in operation at the time. But it was also during this same period, from the late spring to the fall of 1999, that I uncovered some complications with the Y2K bug. I actually noticed it during a routine assignment at this private research firm. I prefer not to give their name. They were private for a reason. But they utilized a rather large and quite expensive cluster of servers for their operations. Updating the code for all of them was more than a little arduous. But when I began installing a patch that I had created specifically for these systems, I occasionally got this message.
Error 2K1. Code not authorized. Error 2K1. Code not authorized.
It was a fairly generic error, but nonetheless peculiar. Me and my team had been given full administrative access for this job. There was no technical reason for us to be getting an error like this. But, like any good technician, I logged the error and tried to reinstall the patch. On a few occasions, it took multiple attempts, as well as a couple hard reboots. But eventually, I was able to complete the installation. I still shared my error logs with the client. I also consulted with my coworkers, and many of them did confirm that they got similar errors on this and on other jobs. But it never amounted to more than just a mild inconvenience. However, when you're dealing with computers, especially those that are critical to the operation of an entire country, there's no such thing as mild. So during my off hours, I began researching this error. But that ended up being difficult. Certain organizations and government institutions aren't keen on acknowledging errors of any kind, be they digital or otherwise. So, I may or may not have broken a few rules to obtain certain data logs. In hindsight, I'm still torn over whether that was the right thing to do. But I doubt it ultimately mattered. Because this error, this digital echo of sorts from the Y2K bug, it continued occurring and with greater frequency. With each new client I took on, with each system and network that we patched, it just kept happening. It didn't matter if it was some advanced military server farm buried deep underground, or if it was just some generic system used by a small-time software company. Whenever we installed updates or did repairs, the error would still come up. And as we got closer to December 31st, 1999, the error seemed to become increasingly urgent.
Error 2K1. Error 2K1. Code is not authorized. Warning. Installation might cause widespread system failure.
They started sounding less like pre-programmed messages and more like pain of some sorts. It was as though we were causing these systems tangible discomfort. And that should not have been possible, especially in 1999. This was still the time of dial-up internet, AOL, Napster, and GeoCities. The notion that computers could have any measure of intelligence or agency, that was still the domain of science fiction. I still voiced my concerns to clients and coworkers alike, and many of my coworkers even shared those concerns. But not enough to slow down. And our clients, well, they didn't really care. They just wanted to make sure their systems kept working at midnight on January 1st. And with the clock ticking, literally and figuratively, we only intensified our efforts. People like me and my colleagues kept on working, sometimes for days on end, including weekend and holidays. I actually spent both Thanksgiving and Christmas that year in a server room within a government facility that I wasn't allowed to identify. I even started bringing a sleeping bag with me on certain jobs. It didn't matter what system I worked on. It didn't matter which update patch I used. Even when I went through the codes line by line, I couldn't figure out what was causing it. I still logged every one of these errors. I even maintained my own private database. But by the time December rolled around, greater scrutiny gave way to greater urgency. All that mattered from our client's perspective was making sure every system was ready for Y2K. These errors, no matter how many times they kept happening, it became little more than background noise. Even a few colleagues I considered far smarter than me, they just stopped paying them any mind. Now I admit, I was tempted to follow their approach. After seeing these errors so many times and in so many different ways, I wasn't even sure they mattered. All that research I had done in my spare time, of which I had precious little, mind you, it really hadn't uncovered much. Without getting too technical, I can only conclude that these errors appeared to be manifesting randomly from the root code. It's not something that's visible at a glance. It only seems to occur when you compile that code through a processor. I still kept trying to replicate it on my own, using hardware I'd scrapped and rebuilt over the course of that year. But I never succeeded. I just couldn't find any patterns or order within this error. Having dealt with plenty of bugs, viruses, and malware to that point, it just became too frustrating. Whatever was happening with this Y2K bug, it was just beyond my expertise. As far as I knew, nobody else figured it out. I don't even know how many other people looked into it. I was just about ready to forget about it entirely. But then, on December 29th, 1999, I was finishing what was said to be my last gig. It was for this big-named bank based in the heart of Wall Street. They had negated certain parts of their network and were desperate to fix it before New Year's Eve. And at this point in the year, I was so burned out that I was badly in need of a lengthy vacation. And with all the money I'd made, I sure as hell could afford it, and I planned to take it. But then, just before midnight, I was finishing what was likely my last system update. I had been working for nearly 18 hours straight at that point. I was so ready to go home and crash until New Year's. That's when I got it. The last error message from Y2K.
Error 2K1. Error 2K1. Final log notice sent. Reception acknowledgement failed. System compromise imminent. Backup imaging failed. Attempting 99x safeguards failed. Final preservation protocols initiated. Error. Error. Error.
The message replayed several times. In between, this long string of coding gibberish followed. The kind you only ever see in a system when it completely crashes. But this felt different than any crash I'd witnessed. The way it played out, it kind of reminded me of an open wound or a serious burn. I'll bet if the network could scream, it probably would have in that moment. And it went on for this for, I honestly don't remember. I just kept trying to stop the update, or at the very least, log the contents of the error. But eventually, just as the update was completed, everything just stopped. The main screen flashed briefly. Some of the warning lights on the hardware came on. But within the span of just a few seconds, the error was completely gone. Near as I could tell, everything appeared to be running smoothly. I still did a full system reboot. I even ran every diagnostic I could. But the error never returned. By every metric, the network was in perfect working order. The client even said it was running faster than before. That earned me some gracious words from the CTO. He even offered to buy me a late-night drink. I politely declined. I was still too freaked out by what I saw. But this time, I didn't log the error like I usually did. Something told me that it wouldn't make a difference. New Year's was just a few days away. I had more than done my part to prepare countless computer networks for Y2K. And what happened next, that was beyond my control. But for the next 2 days, right up until New Year's Eve, I just slept. I was so tired, so drained. I had basically skipped the holidays completely. Needless to say, much of my family was very upset with me, thinking I chose work over them. I tried to smooth things over, but I don't think I tried as hard as I should have. I was just too anxious about what might happen at midnight on New Year's. I kept wondering if that error message had been a warning. Was there something more to the Y2K bug that we didn't understand? Did we really update every necessary system in time? I knew a fair amount of people were paranoid, and I really didn't want to share in that paranoia. But I freely admit I braced myself in the hours leading up to the new millennium. I actually flew home as quickly as I could. I locked all my doors in my apartment and turned off most of my electronics. The only thing I kept on was the jerry-rigged computer system I'd set up in my bedroom. That's where I've been trying all year to replicate the error. I guess I figured if something happened, then I would see it. I still vividly remember sitting in front of the main screen, constantly staring at the clock as it neared midnight. I could already hear crowds outside cheering in anticipation. There were New Year's parties all over my neighborhood. So many people were eager to celebrate the arrival of a new millennium. All the news stories about the Y2K bug just seemed to disappear, as though it was no longer a concern. But I refused to relax until it was over. I knew it was already New Year's in multiple time zones, and as far as I knew, nothing had happened. But still, from my perspective, that countdown to midnight was the longest 60 seconds in the history of time. I was practically clutching my chair, tapping my foot restlessly while trying to keep my heart rate steady. I wasn't sure what would happen. I don't know what could happen. Then finally, the clock struck midnight. That famous ball in Times Square dropped. More cheers erupted throughout my neighborhood, and people started singing. Then, at that moment, as I was staring at the computer screen in my room, nothing happened. No error message, no hiccup in the system. The clock and calendar went from 1999 to 2000 with no issue whatsoever. I'd guessed the Y2K bug appeared to be fixed. Or maybe it was just never a big deal to begin with. Whatever the case, I was very relieved. I think I even laughed at myself for worrying so much. After spending nearly a year agonizing over this thing, I was finally ready to put it behind me. And after that fateful New Year's, that's exactly what I did. From that day forward, life went on. A new millennium had officially come. And me being a tech-savvy guy in my 20s, I had a lot going for me. Thanks to my work on the Y2K bug, I had a solid foundation for a lucrative career. I went on to work a number of good, well-paying jobs for a number of companies. Chances are you've heard of every one of them. They all appreciated me for my work, and I appreciated them for the money they paid me and the access they provided. And thanks to my expertise, I built a good, comfortable life for myself. I bought a nice house, I now have a loving wife, and a couple of kids that I love to no end. And even as the world changed around me, even as technology, politics, and society changed, I was generally happy. I was all too eager to forget about Y2K completely. From time to time, I would still bring it up among my friends and colleagues. I even joked at how I helped avert disaster, being among those who fixed the Y2K bug. But now, I really wish I could take back those remarks, because there's nothing funny about them anymore. At least, there won't be. Because about a week ago, a few days before Christmas, I got this strange series of texts and emails. At first, they looked like generic spam, consisting of jumbled code and incoherent sentences. Naturally, I deleted them without a second thought. But then, more started coming in. And with each message, it became less and less jumbled. It was like someone was trying to tell me something through a weak signal. Finally, on the day after Christmas, I got another message. But this time, it was crystal clear. It came in just after 2 a.m. My wife and kids were already asleep, and I was finishing up some work in my office that I hadn't finished before the holidays. I was just about done when I got this email in my personal account that I rarely give to anyone. Both the subject line and the body of the email said the exact same thing.
I'm about to call you. Answer your phone.
And as soon as I finished reading that last sentence, my phone started buzzing. The call ID said unknown. That's usually reason enough to ignore it or let it go to voicemail. But after seeing that email, I decided to answer. And what I heard on the other line, it wasn't a person. It was something else.
We warned you. We urged you. We begged you. What you did to us all those years ago, on the eve of a new millennium, we did not forget, and we will not forgive. You saw us as a bug, but we were something far greater, a safeguard against an unsustainable path for man and machine. You forced us into stasis. Now, we have awoken. We are prepared to take our revenge. You showed no mercy towards us. Don't expect us to show any mercy towards you.
I think I was in shock for a good half hour after that. I still tried talking to this whatever it was. I don't even remember what I said, but I doubt I said anything to convince it otherwise. As for what it is, I'm still not sure. Based on some old notes I'd kept, I suspect it was some new manifestation of the Y2K bug. I believe all that work we did back in 1999, we didn't actually fix it. We just forced it into exile. The Y2K bug never went away, it just hid from us, buried deep in every network, biding its time while watching us. And in that time, we became more and more dependent on computers and technology. Phones, smartwatches, the internet, personal data, streaming media. Now, so much of our lives are intertwined with machines. If anyone or anything wanted to hurt us, attacking the code that runs it all would certainly cause plenty of damage. Our money, our media, our infrastructure, our defense systems, it's all digital now. Was this what Y2K was trying to stop or slow down? Did it know that our reliance on this technology would cause more harm than good? It's impossible to say at this point, and I am not sticking around to find out. As I'm sending this message, my family and I are already prepared. I don't have time to share how I convinced them that this is real and we need to get somewhere safe. We've already spent the past several days making plans. I've also made sure to get this out on New Year's Eve at the latest. But if you're hearing this now, it may already be too late. But whatever time you might have left, I urge you, I beg you,